I took the job because the rent notice was taped to my door when I got home from the last warehouse shift, and my account was already sitting at minus $43, with no paycheck coming in for another week and a half. The fridge was basically empty, except for some mustard and half a loaf of bread that was starting to go hard at the edges. Ray's text came in while I was eating cold pizza straight from the box at the kitchen counter. The kind of message that doesn't waste words, because the guy on the other end has probably sent it to half a dozen other guards already, and is just waiting for one idiot to say yes. St. Agnes Medical Center night security, 3 nights to start, $28 an hour, cash under the table if I signed the form and kept my mouth shut about whatever happened on shift. I typed back, yes, before I could talk myself out of it, or think too hard about why the pay was that good for a small hospital on the edge of town, where most shifts were probably just walking empty halls and checking doors that stayed locked anyway. He sent the side door code, 7391#, and told me to be there by 9:45 Thursday night. No more details. No welcome aboard. Just that. I stared at the screen for a minute, then finished the pizza and tried to sleep, but mostly lay there listening to the fridge hum and thinking about how boring most night shifts are anyway. Just walking around empty buildings, making sure nothing gets stolen, and the money would cover the rent and maybe leave enough for groceries that weren't just ramen. So I told myself it was fine, even if the short notice felt a little off. I left the apartment at 8:20 because traffic can back up even late at night, and I didn't want to blow the first decent-paying gig in months by showing up late on the very first shift. The drive took 27 minutes exactly, with the radio playing low, static-filled talk shows that I wasn't really listening to because my mind kept drifting to how tired my back already felt from lifting pallets the day before, and how the extra cash might let me skip a few shifts later if things got too much. The hospital sat at the end of a cracked service road behind the old rail yard where the trains don't run much anymore. A 3-story brick building with narrow, arched windows and a faded sign out front that probably hadn't been painted since before I was born. The parking lot was mostly empty when I pulled in, just a handful of staff cars scattered under the sodium lights and one ambulance idling with its engine off and lights dark. I backed into a spot near the side employee door like the text said, killed the ignition, and sat there listening to the engine tick down. My neck already felt stiff from the drive, and my back ached from the warehouse lifting. The building looked solid enough, old but not falling apart, the kind of place that had seen better days but still kept the lights on. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove box, even though the rules packet hadn't mentioned it yet, and headed for the door, feeling the cool night air on my face and wondering if the 3 nights would be as quiet as they sounded, or if the high pay was there because something kept scaring people off. The side door opened with the code, and the hallway inside smelled like pine cleaner mixed with old coffee and something faintly metallic I couldn't place right away. The lights came on in sections as I walked, motion sensors clicking like they were half asleep themselves and not quite sure if they wanted to bother. The elevator took forever to arrive, doors wheezing open like the whole thing was tired too. Basement level. The security office door was propped open with a rubber doorstop. The room was small, metal desk with cigarette burns even though smoking had been banned forever. Swivel chair with foam poking through the ripped vinyl seat. 6 monitors mounted on the wall showing black and white feeds of empty corridors, empty lobby, empty cafeteria tables, empty stairwells. One fluorescent tube overhead buzzed every few seconds like it might give up any minute. A manila envelope was taped to the middle monitor with my name written on it in thick black Sharpie. I sat down, and the chair creaked under me, loud in the quiet. I ripped the envelope open. One sheet of plain printer paper inside, edges slightly curled from being folded once. Night security protocols. St. Agnes Medical Center. Follow every line exactly, no exceptions. Guards who skip steps no longer work here for a reason. Shift begins at 10 p.m. Be inside the security office by 9:55 p.m. Between 10:05 and 10:50 p.m., conduct full patrol starting on the 3rd floor long-term care wing and working your way down to the 1st floor. Any person found inside after 10 p.m. without current staff badge or patient wristband gets escorted straight to the main entrance doors and watched until they leave hospital property completely. No phone calls allowed, no arguments, no letting them back in for any reason. Between 11:15 p.m. and 2:45 a.m., a woman in a blue coat may appear outside the main glass entrance doors asking to see her husband. Do not open the door. Do not answer the intercom. Do not look at her for more than 4 seconds at a time. She will usually leave after 20 to 30 minutes. If she is still standing there at 2:50 a.m., pick up the red phone on the wall, dial extension 000. Say only, "Main entrance visitor needs escort," then hang up right away. Do not wait for any reply. The ICU lights on the first floor must stay on all night. If they go off for any reason, go turn them back on using the switch just inside the unit doors. If you hear loud screaming or yelling coming from inside the ICU while the lights are off, go immediately to the nearest staff bathroom on any floor, lock the door, sit on the floor with your back against it, and stay there until the screaming stops completely and the hallway lights return to normal white. Only then go turn the ICU lights back on. If a little girl carrying a teddy bear is sitting alone at one of the tables in the cafeteria, sit down next to her and stay quiet. If she looks directly at you, stand up and walk back to the security office without saying anything. If she starts talking to you, answer her questions calmly until she gets up and leaves on her own. Do not follow her when she goes. At or around 1 a.m., go to the second floor general ward. Check every patient room listed on the clipboard left at the nurse's station. If a patient is sitting upright in bed with their eyes open, ask once if they need anything right now. If they ask for water or a blanket adjustment, or to call the nurse for pain medicine, do it quickly and leave the room. If they start talking about anything else, leave the room without answering or making eye contact again. If the building power flickers and the red emergency lights come on in the halls, do not use the elevator. Take the west stairwell down to the basement utility room. Open the main breaker panel. If the big master switch is in the off position, flip it back on. Do not look at the other breakers or try to figure out why it was flipped. Close the panel and return straight to the security office. Write only the time in the logbook, nothing else. If all 6 security monitors go completely black with no signal and no static for longer than 10 seconds, leave the security office right away. Go to supply closet 112 on the first floor, next to the cafeteria entrance. Lock the door from the inside, turn off the light, sit on the floor behind the tall metal shelves against the back wall, and stay completely quiet, no matter what you hear outside. Do not check your phone. Do not open the door until you see daylight coming under the bottom and hear regular daytime staff moving around. Voices, knocks, sounds like people you know, drilling, anything at all, stay quiet. I read the page 5 times straight through because the first time it sounded like regular corporate weirdness, the kind of thing older guards write to mess with new guys. But the second time, the wording felt too careful, like whoever typed it had been up all night making sure nothing was left out. And the third time, my stomach turned over a little, thinking about how specific the times and the exact words were. By the fourth time, I started wondering if the high pay was because people had ignored this list before. And the fifth time, I folded the paper and slid it into my back pocket because I needed the money, and rules are rules, even if they sound crazy. I told myself I'd just follow them to the letter, get the cash, and move on. The clock on the wall said 9:51. I leaned back in the chair and waited, feeling the weight of the building above me already, even though the shift hadn't officially started. My mind kept drifting to how quiet it was down here, and how the fluorescent buzz was starting to get into my head. At 10 p.m., I started the patrol, 3rd floor first, because starting at the top and working down made sense, and I figured it would keep me moving so I wouldn't sit too long and let my mind wander. The hallway carpet was thin and worn in the middle from years of nurses and carts rolling over it, and the walls had that beige paint that turns yellow under fluorescent lights. I checked every room door one by one, pushing them open slowly and shining the flashlight inside, even though the overheads were on. Most rooms were empty, beds made tight, charts hanging in the plastic holders outside the doors. In room 312, An old man was lying on his side with an oxygen mask fogging slightly with each breath. He didn't move when I opened the door, just kept breathing steady like he was somewhere far away. Room 314 was empty, the TV remote sitting on the pillow like someone had left in a hurry, and the bedside table had a half-empty water cup with a straw bent at the top. Room 316 had the bed stripped down to the plastic mattress, and the call light above the door was off, but I still stepped inside to make sure no one was hiding in the bathroom. The bathroom at the end of the hall smelled like soap and nothing else. I checked the window latch. It was locked tight, and the mirror over the sink showed my own tired face looking back at me, dark circles already starting to show. The whole floor felt too quiet, just the low hum of the air system and my own footsteps, and every so often the soft beep of a monitor from a room I hadn't reached yet. I kept thinking about how hospitals are supposed to have nurses moving around even at night, but here it was just me, and the emptiness was starting to feel heavier than it should. I took the stairs down instead of the elevator. The rule didn't say anything about stairs, and I didn't want to get stuck in a box if something happened. The stairwell echoed my steps back at me louder than I liked. The second-floor general ward felt a little more lived in, but still empty enough to notice. More rooms, more beeping monitors in some of them. I walked slowly, shining the light into every corner. Room 218 had a woman asleep with her arm in a sling. The call light above her bed was off, but the IV drip was still running slow. Room 220 was empty, but the bed looked slept in. Sheets pulled back, a plastic water cup still on the tray table half full, and a magazine open on the chair like someone had been reading and just stepped out. Room 222 had the call light glowing red above the door, but when I looked inside, the patient was snoring loud, mouth open, one arm hanging off the side of the bed. Room 224 was empty, the curtains drawn halfway, and the window cracked open an inch, even though it was cold outside. I closed it because it felt wrong to leave it like that. Room 226 had an old guy sitting up slightly, but his eyes were closed, and he was breathing even, so I left him alone. One call light was glowing red above room 230, but when I looked inside, the patient was snoring loud with his mouth open. I turned off the light at the nurse's station and kept moving, my legs starting to feel the hours on concrete from the warehouse the night before. My back was tight between the shoulders from all the bending to check under beds. I checked the time on my phone, 10:29, still on schedule. But the quiet was getting to me a little, the way it does when you realize how big a building feels when no one else is in it. First floor, ICU at the far end. I looked through the big windows. 4 patients, all still, lights on steady. Lobby empty except for the glow from the vending machines humming in the corner. Cafeteria dark, tables wiped down, chairs pushed in neat. I walked the whole loop twice because the rule said to make sure no one was there, and I wanted to be thorough, checking behind every vending machine and under every table, even though it felt stupid. Back in the security office at 10:52, the chair felt good after all that walking, even with the rip in the seat. I poured coffee from the half-full pot in the break room. It was bitter and lukewarm, but warm enough, and I drank it anyway. I sat there scrolling through my phone, the same 3 apps I always do when I'm killing time. Videos of people fixing old trucks, local news about road construction, a thread about night shift pay that made me laugh once because it was mostly complaints about exactly this kind of quiet that starts to feel wrong after a while. The minutes went by easier that way. My eyes got heavy, but not enough to close yet. I kept glancing at the monitors to make sure nothing had changed. At 11:18 p.m., I glanced at the main entrance camera. A woman in a blue coat was standing outside the glass doors, hands in her pockets, looking in. I switched to the stairwell feed after 4 seconds, like the rule said. She knocked once. The sound came through the speaker, thin and sharp. Then again a few minutes later, softer. Then harder, like she was getting impatient. I kept watching the other monitors, the ones showing empty halls, the cafeteria, the ICU lights still on. But my eyes kept wanting to drift back to her feed. She paced a little back and forth outside the doors, her coat flapping in the wind. I didn't look back, even when the knocking came again, louder this time. Then a pause. Then another knock. 27 minutes later, she turned and walked out of frame, gone into the dark. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding and went to make another pot of coffee because the first one was already wearing off, and the night still had hours left. My shoulders were starting to ache from the tension I didn't even realize I was holding. At midnight, I did another loop just to stay moving, because sitting too long makes the thoughts louder. Third floor, still quiet. The old man in 312 still breathing steady. The empty rooms still empty. Second floor the same. The empty beds still empty. The snoring guy still snoring. First floor, the ICU lights steady, the morgue access door on the sub-basement padlocked tight. The building made small sounds, pipes ticking, the roof creaking when the wind picked up outside. Nothing that felt wrong exactly, just the kind of quiet that gets under your skin after a while and makes you check your phone more often than you should. Back in the office, I drank the new coffee and felt it hit my stomach sour, but kept drinking anyway because the tiredness was starting to creep in behind my eyes. I needed to stay sharp. I started thinking about how many nights I'd done this kind of thing before, and how this one already felt different, even though nothing had happened yet. At 12:37 a.m., the ICU lights on camera 2 went dark. I stared at the screen for a few seconds longer than I should have, then got up and walked there. The hallway felt longer this time, each step echoing a little more than before, my flashlight beam bouncing off the walls. When I reached the ICU, the overhead lights were off. Only the red emergency strips along the baseboards were on, giving everything a dull glow that made the beds look like shadows. From inside one of the rooms came loud yelling. A man's voice, hoarse and angry. Words I couldn't make out, but the tone was bad enough to make my skin crawl and my pulse pick up. The rule said, if screaming, go to the bathroom. I turned around fast and went to the staff bathroom halfway down the hall, locked the door, and sat on the cold tile with my back against it, knees pulled up, feeling the chill seep through my pants. The yelling kept going for maybe 4 minutes. Then a door slammed somewhere, hard enough to make the walls vibrate a little. Then another slam farther away. Footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate. Someone humming a low tune, off-key, like they were half asleep or half something else. The humming got closer, then stopped, then started again. The footsteps stopped right outside the bathroom door. The humming stopped. A voice, male, tired but clear, came through the wood. Anyone in there? The handle rattled once. Not hard, just testing. Then rattled again, a little harder. I kept my mouth shut, breathing shallow through my nose, my heart pounding so loud I was sure it could be heard. My hands started to sweat even though the room was cold. After a minute, the footsteps moved on down the hall. The yelling had stopped completely, but then started again, softer, like it was coming from farther away. I waited another 5 full minutes until the hallway lights went back to normal. Then I went to the ICU, flipped the light switch inside the door and checked the patients. They were quiet now, breathing steady like nothing had happened. But one of them had the sheet pulled up over his face, and I didn't look too long. I walked back to the office faster than I needed to, my legs feeling heavy, my shirt sticking to my back even though the building was cool. My mind raced with questions about how the lights could go off by themselves, and who was yelling like that if the patients were all still. At 1:02 a.m., the clipboard was on the nurse's station counter on the second floor, exactly like the rule said. 5 rooms listed in neat handwriting. I checked them one at a time. The first 3 patients were asleep, mouths open or turned away from the door, breathing even. The 4th room had an empty bed, stripped clean, the pillow still dented. The 5th room had a man sitting up straight, eyes open, hands flat on the blanket, not blinking. I stopped in the doorway, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. "You need anything right now?" He asked for water, his voice raspy like he'd been coughing for hours. I went to the station sink, filled a cup, brought it back. He drank it slowly, thanked me, then said, "Sit down for a minute, son." I sat on the edge of the chair because the rule said to do what they request. He started talking about how the night doctor had been rough with the IV earlier. Said the guy seemed angry about something, like he had a lot on his mind. Maybe wasn't paying attention to the patients the way he should. He said sometimes people in this building don't leave the same way they came in. I stood up without answering and left the room, closed the door behind me, and walked back downstairs. The weight of the building felt heavier now, like the walls were listening. Back in the office, I sat heavy. The clock said 1:47. I heard a thud from the third floor, like something metal was hitting the floor hard. But I stayed in the chair because the rule didn't say to check every noise. My back was sore, my legs felt heavy, and I was starting to wonder if this was some kind of test, or if the previous guards had written the list after something real happened that they didn't want to talk about. I closed my eyes for what I thought was a minute, trying to shake the tiredness. When I opened them, the clock said 2:41. I stood up fast, neck stiff, and went to the cafeteria for fresh coffee. The machine took forever to brew, gurgling loud in the empty room, the smell filling the space. When I turned around with the full cup, there was a little girl sitting at one of the tables near the window. Blonde hair, pink t-shirt, white skirt, a teddy bear with one loose button eye in her lap. She looked maybe 7 or 8. I remembered the rule, walked over, and sat across from her. The cafeteria was dead quiet except for the vending machine hum and my own breathing, the coffee cup warm in my hands. She stared at me without blinking for a long time, her hands folded in her lap around the bear. I stayed quiet. She finally spoke. "Why do you have to stay here all night?" I told her it was my job, trying to keep my voice steady and not too loud. She asked if I had kids, if I liked the hospital, if the coffee was good, if I was scared of the dark, if I knew where her mom was, if I ever got lonely walking these halls, if I thought the building remembered things. I answered each one, short but polite, because the rule said to talk back if she spoke, and I didn't want to make anything worse. My words felt thick in my mouth from the tiredness. She giggled once, covering her mouth with one hand while the other held the bear tight, then asked more questions, about my truck, if it was fast, if I ever drove fast at night, if I ever saw things in the rearview mirror that weren't there. I answered those too, feeling the minutes stretch out, the table between us feeling smaller. After maybe 15 minutes, she stood up, hugged the teddy bear tight, and walked out toward the lobby without looking back, her footsteps light on the tile. I waited until she was gone, then went back to the office, my legs shaking a little now, not from running, but from the way the night was stretching out. At 2:58 a.m., all 6 monitors went black at the same time. No static, no timestamp, just black. 10 seconds became 15, then 20, then 30. I got out of the chair, grabbed the flashlight, and went straight to supply closet 112. The door was unlocked, like always. Inside, I locked it, killed the light, and sat on the floor behind the tall shelves stacked with toilet paper and cleaning bottles. The room smelled like bleach and cardboard. My breathing sounded too loud in the dark. My heart hammered against my ribs. I could feel the cold tile through my pants right away, the shelf edge digging into my shoulder. I heard footsteps in the hallway after a minute, slow and careful, like someone searching room by room. A voice called my name once, then again. The same tired male voice from earlier. "Jake, you around? Need a hand with something?" The closet door handle rattled. Not hard, just checking. Then rattled again, a little harder, like they were testing if it would give. Then it stopped. Footsteps moved away, but came back after a while, closer this time. Later, I heard a drill sound, high and whining, like someone working on a lock down the hall. Then voices, 2 people arguing low, words I couldn't catch but the tone sharp and frustrated, and one of them sounded like they were laughing under it. I stayed where I was, back against the wall, knees pulled up, the shelf edge digging deeper into my shoulder. Time stretched out. My legs went numb, then tingled, then cramped. I counted my breaths to keep from moving. 1, 2, 3, 4. The drill stopped. The voices faded, then came back closer. Someone knocked softly on the closet door, saying my name again, then humming the same off-key tune from earlier. The humming turned into words I couldn't quite make out, but the rhythm was steady and patient. I covered my ears with my hands, pressed my forehead to my knees, and kept counting. Sweat started on my back even though the room was cold. The knocking stopped after a while. The drill started again farther away, loud enough to carry through the walls and make the shelves vibrate a little. I sat there, the tiredness turning into something heavier, the kind that makes your thoughts loop. Why is this happening? How did they know my name? Is this real, or am I losing it from no sleep? The money suddenly felt like nothing. The drill stopped for good after what felt like hours. Then nothing. Just my own breathing and the occasional creak of the building settling. I started thinking about easier nights at the warehouse, where the worst thing was a drunk guy yelling at the gate. My eyes burned even in the dark, thoughts slowing and tangling, until I was just waiting for daylight to save me. By the time daylight showed under the door, thin and gray, I could hear carts rolling and normal talking in the hallway. Voices that sounded ordinary. Tired nurses complaining about the coffee machine. Someone laughing about a patient's joke. Morning sounds that made the night feel like a bad dream. I stood up slowly, legs numb and prickling, unlocked the door. A janitor pushing a mop bucket past the closet. Older guy, gray hair, looked at me like he'd seen this before. "Rough night?" he asked. I nodded. He didn't ask anything else, just kept mopping. The hospital looked ordinary in the morning light. People in scrubs walking with coffee, phones ringing. Everything normal, like the night could be erased by daylight. I walked out the side door, got in my truck, and drove home. The sun coming up making my eyes burn, my hands shaking a little on the wheel. I slept most of the day in fits, waking up every hour or so thinking I heard knocking or humming, or my name or the drill starting up again. When I woke up for good, the clock said 6:30 p.m. Ray had texted twice, asking if I was coming in tonight. I didn't answer right away, just stared at the messages for a long time, then put the phone down. The next night he called. I let it go to voicemail. The message was short. "Need to know if you're showing. The list is there for a reason. Call me." I deleted it. He texted again the next day, and the day after that. I kept not answering until the messages stopped coming. I never went back. The folded paper is still in my glove box. I take it out sometimes when I'm at a red light and read the lines again. Slow. The building was real. The rules were real. The woman in the blue coat. The lights going off. The screaming. The guy asking for water. The little girl. The monitors dying. The voice knowing my name. The drill sound. All of it happened. I followed every step, and I still sat in that closet, feeling the floor cold through my pants, wondering if the door would hold if someone really wanted in, and how close I came to opening it just to make the waiting stop. The pay was good, but some things cost more than money. I went back to the warehouse. Hours are shorter, money tighter. But when the shift ends, I get in my truck, and the only thing knocking on glass is rain. Sometimes. No lists, no red phones, no waiting for daylight under a closet door. If you ever see a night security posting for St. Agnes, ask for the packet before you say yes. Read it twice. Then sit in your car for a minute and ask yourself if you really want to know why those rules exist. I found out. I'm not going back to unlearn it. The nights feel longer now when I think about it, but at least I sleep when it's dark outside. That's something. And right now, it's enough. Even if the quiet still feels a little too familiar sometimes. I'm not sure why nights always seem to win with me. They pull me back into these empty buildings where the only sounds are machines running and my own thoughts getting louder the longer I sit still. The days are even worse. People calling, bills piling up, the sun making everything feel too bright and too real. So I keep taking these night monitoring jobs, even when the quiet starts to feel like it's pressing in. This time it's the Central Valley Tissue Repository, out past the old rail yards where the streetlights fade out and the fences seem endless. The building is a low concrete box, no windows in the storage areas, heavy doors that seal with a hiss like they're holding back more than just cold air. My shift runs from 10 at night to 6 in the morning. I watch the system dashboards for any temperature spikes in the vaults, check the camera feeds for the long aisles of refrigerated units holding blood and tissue samples, and do one full walkthrough each night to make sure the seals are tight and the backup cooling units are still running. Most nights, nothing moves except the air handlers, and I spend the hours trying not to let the quiet get too deep under my skin. Tonight I got there a little early, 9:37, because the drive felt shorter than usual, and sitting at home staring at the same four walls was making my head feel too loud. Punched in, dropped my lunch bag on the desk, signed the turnover sheet while the day guy was already halfway out the door mumbling something about steady temps and no alarms. I waited until I heard his car leave the lot before I dimmed the overhead lights down to the lowest setting because the bright ones always gave me a headache after the first hour, and the dim made the room feel smaller, safer somehow. Control room is nothing special. My desk with 3 monitors, 2 extra chairs nobody ever uses, a door straight to the main corridor that runs alongside the vaults. I poured the first cup of coffee from the break room machine that always tastes like it's been sitting since yesterday, sat down, and pulled out my phone because the first stretch always drags and I needed something to fill the empty space before the real quiet settled in. I started scrolling through some old forum threads about night jobs that went sideways, the kind where people post blurry phone pics and half-remembered details, and everyone in the comments argues about what was real. One thread kept pulling me in, stories from guys who worked alone in medical storage places, reporting shadows on cameras that weren't there when they checked, finding things moved that shouldn't have been. I clicked a link to a longer post and let it play in my head while I kept one eye on the camera grid. The room was cool from the air system, and the only sound was the low hum from the monitors and the occasional soft beep when a log updated. The narrator in the thread described the way the lights in the aisles would click on by themselves sometimes, and how the quiet after that felt heavier. And I felt that familiar little twist in my gut, but kept reading anyway because the environment was perfect for it. Lights low, building empty, hours stretching out ahead with nothing but me and the screens. Around 11:22, I thought I caught a quick shift on camera 17, the one covering the far end of aisle 7 in vault 3 where the older samples are kept. Just a flicker in the corner of the frame, something passing low and fast for half a second, then gone. The motion lights in that aisle stayed off, so I told myself it was dust or the camera glitching like they do when the humidity creeps up. I switched the feed to full screen and watched for a full minute, but nothing else moved. The aisle looked exactly like always. Rows of sealed units on heavy metal shelves, floor marked with yellow tape, red glow of the temperature sensor steady. I went back to the thread, but the flicker kept tugging at the edge of my vision, and after another 8 minutes it happened again, longer this time, the lights in the aisle clicking on and staying on for almost 20 seconds before going dark again. No temperature change on the dashboard, no door alarm, but the motion sensor had definitely tripped. I sat there staring at the screen, coffee cup halfway to my mouth, telling myself it was nothing. Probably a loose panel settling or the air handler stirring something small. But the quiet in the control room felt thicker now and the hum from the monitors seemed louder in my ears. I let it sit for another 10 minutes, eyes flicking between the thread and camera 17, but the aisle stayed dark and still. At 12:08, I decided to do the physical walkthrough early because sitting there waiting for the next flicker was making my neck tight and my thoughts start looping in that way they do when the night gets too quiet. Grabbed the flashlight from the drawer even though the emergency lights would kick on, took the master keyring from the hook by the door, and stepped out into the corridor. The hallway was long and straight, vault doors spaced along one side, the air handlers louder out here with that steady low roar that swallows smaller sounds. I punched in the code for Vault 3 and the heavy door clicked open with the slow hydraulic hiss that always makes me pause for half a second like I'm waiting for something to answer from inside. The air hit me colder by 10 degrees, carrying that chemical sterile smell they use to keep everything preserved. Motion lights started clicking on one row at a time as I stepped forward, overhead fluorescents flooding the aisle with bright white that made my eyes water until they adjusted. I walked slowly down the center path, checking seals on the units as I went, metal cold under my fingers, the low drone of the cooling fans filling every inch of space so that any other noise got eaten right away, reached the spot camera 17 covered and stopped, shining the flashlight into the gaps between the racks. Shelves went back 25 feet on each side, packed tight with the sealed containers, barcodes, and dates going back years. I stepped between the units, space narrow enough that my shoulders brushed the metal, cold seeping through my shirt. Checked every row, bending to look under the lower shelves, standing on tiptoe to see the tops, shining the light into every shadow. The lights stayed on the whole time, bright and steady, but nothing looked wrong. No boxes shifted, no doors ajar, no footprints in the thin dust that collects along the edges. I walked the full length of the aisle twice, listening hard under the fan noise, but all I heard was my own breathing and the rubber soles of my shoes on the concrete. My back was starting to ache from all the bending and the cold was settling into my joints, but the place was empty, same as always. I stood there in the last row for a long minute, flashlight beam steady on the far wall, feeling the tiredness mix with that low nagging feeling that something had been there and left before I arrived. The lights started clicking off behind me as I walked back out, darkness closing in section by section until I was through the door and back in the main corridor, the hiss of the vault ceiling behind me sounding louder than it should. Back in the control room, I dropped into the chair and the relief felt thin, like it didn't quite reach the middle of my chest. Poured another cup of coffee, hands not quite steady, and went back to the thread, but the words weren't sticking anymore. Kept glancing at camera 17, even though the feed showed nothing. The hours after that dragged slower than usual. I did the system checks at 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., logs clean both times, no anomalies. Walked the corridor once more around 3:40 just to move. Checked Vault 2 and Vault 4 quick. Nothing tripped, nothing out of place. The tiredness was deep now, the kind that makes your thoughts feel thick and slow. And I started thinking about how many nights I had sat in rooms like this, and how the quiet always found a way to press in closer the longer the shift went. Switched to a different thread about old factory night shifts because the medical storage ones were sitting too close tonight, but even that didn't help much. The words blurred and my eyes kept drifting back to the camera grid. At 5:15, I started the end-of-shift checks, logging the temperatures, saving the footage, making sure everything was green for the day guy. The building felt exactly the same as when I started, but the quiet had worked its way into my bones, and I was ready to be out of it. Grabbed my lunch bag, the key ring, walked the corridor one last time, making sure all the vault doors were locked the way the checklist said. Pushed the side door open at 5:58, the parking lot still dark, sky just starting to show gray in the east. My car was where I left it under the single light pole and I was halfway across the lot, keys already in my hand, when I saw something tucked under the windshield wiper. Small white rectangle, edges catching the light. I stopped, stood there for a second, then walked over slow. It was a Polaroid, the kind with the wide white border, the image still a little dark like it had just finished developing. I pulled it free and held it up to the pole light. The picture showed aisle 7 in Vault 3, same one I had walked earlier, lights on bright. I was in the frame, standing at the far end of the row, back to the camera, flashlight raised like I was about to look around the last corner. Behind me, in the narrow gap between two racks where no mounted camera should have been able to see, a man's hand was visible reaching out. Fingers curled around something dark and thin, the sleeve of a dark jacket showing at the wrist, the angle close enough that the hand looked like it could have been inches from my shoulder. The photo was sharp, the hand solid, the knife, if that's what it was, catching a thin line of light along the blade. I stood there in the lot for a long time, the cold from the concrete coming up through my shoes, the gray light getting brighter around the edges of everything. The building looked ordinary now. The door I had just come out of still closed, The lights inside dimmed for the day. Turned the photo over, but the back was blank. No writing, no mark. Looked around the lot. No other cars. Fence line empty. No movement. The tiredness was still there, but now it was mixed with something sharper that made my hands feel unsteady when I finally unlocked the car and dropped the photo on the passenger seat face down. Drove home without the radio, the image sitting in my head the whole way, the hand close enough that it could have reached out while I was checking those shelves, and I never would have known until it was too late. I slept most of the day in short stretches, waking up every hour or so thinking I heard the click of lights or the low hum of fans starting up. When I finally got up for good, the clock said 6:45 p.m., and there was a text from the day guy asking if anything unusual showed on the overnight footage. I didn't answer. Sat on the edge of the bed for a long time looking at the photo again, the image clearer in the daylight, the hand even more solid, the angle impossible for any of the fixed cameras. Thought about calling the supervisor, but what would I say? That the building was empty when I checked, but the picture showed someone standing behind me in a blind spot. Thought about quitting right then, but the bills were still there, and the days still felt too loud, and the night pay was the only thing keeping the truck running. Put the photo in the glove box and told myself it was a prank or a glitch or something the day crew had set up to mess with the new guy. But the way the hand was positioned didn't feel like a joke. The next night I went back because the quiet at home was worse than the quiet in the building, and the shift started the same. Sat at the console, ran the checks, system logs clean. Did the walkthrough at midnight, aisles empty, lights clicking on and off exactly as they should. Kept the camera feeds up on the main monitor the whole shift and nothing flickered. At 5:30, when I walked out to the car, there was nothing under the wiper and the lot was still empty. Drove home feeling the tiredness settle back into the usual groove, but the photo was still in the glove box, and every time I stopped at a light, I thought about pulling it out to look again. I kept the job for another 3 weeks because the money was steady and nothing else happened. The walkthroughs stayed quiet, the logs stayed clean, the nights blurred into the same routine of coffee and scrolling and trying not to let the quiet press too hard. But the photo stayed in the glove box, and sometimes when the building was especially still, I would catch myself glancing at camera 17 longer than I needed to. The tiredness never really left. It just became part of the job, like the hum of the fans and the cold air from the vaults. I still do the shift because the pay is the same, and the days are for sleeping, and the nights are for sitting there watching screens and telling myself that whatever was in that aisle is gone now. But every time I walk out to the car in the gray light before dawn, I check the windshield first, and the quiet in the lot feels a little too familiar. If you ever see a night monitoring posting for a place like the repository, ask about the camera blind spots in the vaults and whether they keep old Polaroid cameras in the building. Read the turnover notes twice. Then sit in your car for a minute before you punch in and ask yourself if the extra money is worth knowing that someone can stand behind you in a place where no one should be and leave proof that they were there. I know the answer now. I still go in every night, but I don't scroll those threads anymore, and I don't let the quiet get too deep. The building is just a building, and the aisles are just aisles, and the hand in the photo is just a hand. That's what I tell myself when the lights click on and the fans start humming and the shift stretches out ahead of me. It's enough to get me through until morning. Most nights it is. I always end up being the one who locks up the cafe on these dead Monday nights, the kind where the last customer leaves by 9 and the place suddenly feels twice as big and half as safe. I'm there wiping the counters in slow circles while Mara finishes the register in the back. The only sound is the hum of the espresso machine cooling down and our shoes on the tile. Tonight, though, something felt off from the start, like the air was thicker or the lights were dimmer than usual, even though I knew I'd set them the same way I always do. The cafe is small, just 8 tables inside and 4 out on the sidewalk. There's a narrow counter with the pastry case and a big front window looking out on the empty street. It's the kind of place that feels like it's been there forever, but somehow still seems new because the owners keep changing the menu every few months. I've been closing with Mara for almost a year now. She's the assistant manager who stays late to make sure everything is perfect, and I'm the guy who shows up and does the heavy lifting because I'm reliable and I don't complain much, at least not out loud. We don't talk a lot during the shift, but we have this rhythm, me sweeping the floor while she counts the tips, her handing me the mop bucket without saying anything because she knows I'll take it out back without being asked. I was halfway through wiping the last table by the window when I noticed the car parked across the street under the broken streetlight. A dark sedan that hadn't been there when I took the trash out 20 minutes earlier. The engine was off, but the driver was still inside, just sitting there with the window cracked like he was waiting for someone. I kept wiping the same spot over and over, the rag moving in the same circle while I tried not to stare. I told myself it was probably just someone on their phone, or lost, or waiting for the bus stop 2 blocks down. But the way the car was angled toward the cafe made my stomach feel a little tight. Mara came out from the back carrying the deposit bag and dropped it on the counter with that tired sigh she does when the night's been slow, but the paperwork still takes forever. "You almost done?" she asked without looking up, her voice flat from the long day. I nodded, even though I wasn't, because I wanted to get out of there and into my car and home, where the lights worked and the doors locked from the inside. I moved to the next table and kept glancing at the car every few seconds, the rag leaving wet streaks on the wood that dried too fast in the air conditioning. Mara started stacking the chairs on the table near the door, her movements quick and practiced like she'd done it 1,000 times. I thought about saying something about the car, but the words felt stupid in my head, because what was I going to say? Some guy is sitting in his car, big deal. Instead, I asked if she wanted me to take the deposit to the night drop on my way home, like I sometimes do. She shook her head and said no. She'd do it herself tonight because the bank was on her way. The clock on the wall said 10:17, and we still had the floors, bathrooms, and back storage to finish. The quiet between us felt heavier than usual, the kind of quiet that happens when both people are tired and thinking about their own stuff. I finished the tables and grabbed the broom, sweeping crumbs into little piles and pushing them into the dustpan, the sound of the bristles on tile loud in the empty room. Mara went to the front door and flipped the sign to closed, locking the deadbolt with the key on her ring that always jingled too loud. I swept around her feet without saying anything. That's when the car's headlights came on across the street, bright and sudden, and the driver stepped out, a tall guy in a dark jacket. He stood there for a second, looking straight at the cafe like he could see us through the glass, even though the inside lights were low. I stopped sweeping and just held the broom, watching him walk slowly toward the door, his steps deliberate on the sidewalk. Mara noticed him too and stepped back from the door, her hand still on the lock. "We're closed," she called, her voice steady but a little louder than normal. The guy stopped right outside the glass, close enough that I could see his face under the broken streetlight. Mid-30s maybe, unshaven, eyes that didn't blink much. He raised a hand and knocked once, soft, then again. That twist in my stomach tightened. The knocking sounded too patient, like he wasn't in any hurry and already knew we were still inside. Mara unlocked the door just a crack, the chain still on, and told him again that we were closed. Kitchen shut down. Come back tomorrow. He smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, and asked if we had any coffee left, or maybe a pastry he could take for the road. His voice was low and even through the narrow gap. I stood there with the broom in my hands, feeling the wood go slick under my palms. Mara told him no, everything was put away, sorry, and started to close the door, but he put his hand on the frame and asked my name, just like that, casual, like we'd met before. Mara shut the door hard and locked it again, turning the key twice. Then she told me to finish the floors so we could get out of there. I started sweeping again, but my strokes were shorter and faster now, the piles of crumbs scattering instead of collecting. I kept looking at the door, where the guy was still standing, just watching us through the glass with that same smile. We worked faster after that. Mara went to the back to do the final count, and I started mopping the floor in long, wet streaks that reflected the overhead lights. The smell of cleaner was sharp in my nose. Every few minutes I'd glance at the window and the guy was still there, not moving, just standing on the sidewalk with his hands in his pockets like he had all night. Mara came out once to tell me to hurry and saw him still there. For a second, her face changed, the tired lines around her eyes tightening. But she didn't say anything. She just went back to the register and started putting the money in the bag. I finished mopping and took the bucket to the back sink, the water running loud in the small room. When I came back, the guy was gone. The sidewalk was empty under the broken light. The car was still there, but it was dark again. I told Mara he'd left, and she nodded without looking up, but her shoulders stayed tight, like she didn't quite believe it. We did the last checks together, turning off the lights in the front one by one until only the security bulb over the counter was on. The place went dim, full of shadows from the stacked chairs. Mara grabbed her keys and the deposit bag, and I took the trash bag from the back. We walked to the front door together, the tiles still damp under our shoes. She unlocked the door, and we stepped out into the cool night air, the street quiet except for the distant hum of the highway a few blocks away. I locked the door behind us and handed her the key, and we started walking toward the small parking lot behind the building where our cars were parked side by side under a single light. That's when I heard it, a soft scrape from inside the cafe like a chair leg moving on the tile, faint but clear in the quiet. We both stopped at the same time and looked back at the dark windows. The sound didn't repeat. Mara said it was probably the building settling or the cooler kicking on, but her voice was quieter than usual, and she didn't move right away. We kept walking to the cars, but slower now, my ears straining for any other sound. When we reached the lot, I opened my trunk to toss the trash in, and Mara stood by her car with the keys in her hand, staring back at the cafe. The light over the back door flickered once, then steadied. I told her I'd check the door one more time because I thought I might have left it unlocked. She said no, she'd seen me lock it, but I went back anyway, the sidewalk cold under my shoes. When I got to the door, I tried the handle. Locked. The glass was dark, reflecting my own face back at me. I stood there for a second, feeling the night air on my neck. Then I heard it again. The scrape. Louder this time. It came from inside, near the counter where we'd been standing minutes earlier. My hand stayed on the door handle. I didn't turn it. I just listened. The sound stopped after a few seconds, like whatever made it was waiting too. Mara called my name from the lot, soft but urgent, and I walked back fast, telling her I'd heard something inside and that we should call the owner or the police, or at least check the cameras from her phone. She pulled out her phone. But the signal was weak, and the camera app took forever to load, the little spinning circle going around while we stood there between the cars. The light over the back door flickered again, longer this time. When it came back on, I thought I saw a shadow move behind the counter inside, quick and low, like someone ducking down. Mara saw it too. Her hand found my arm without looking, gripping tight. We both stood there, breathing shallow, while the app finally loaded and showed the front camera feed. The counter empty, chairs stacked, the floor still damp from the mop. The back camera wouldn't load, just a black screen with the timestamp running. That's when the main lights inside the cafe came on all at once, bright behind the windows, even though we'd turned them off. We didn't run right away. We just stood there, staring at the lit-up cafe. The shadow was gone, but the feeling that someone was inside was stronger than ever, moving around in the places we'd just cleaned. Mara said we should get in the cars and drive to the gas station down the street, where there were people and lights and cameras. I nodded, but my feet felt heavy. The keys in my pocket suddenly seemed too loud when I pulled them out. We got into our cars at the same time, engines starting up, sounding way too loud in the quiet lot. I backed out first, and Mara followed, our headlights sweeping across the front of the cafe as we left. That's when I saw the shadow again, this time near the front door, tall and still, watching us pull away. We drove straight to the gas station without stopping. The streets were empty and the rearview mirrors showed nothing behind us, but the feeling stayed in my chest, like something had followed us out of the building even though I knew it hadn't. At the gas station, we sat in my car for a long time with the doors locked, the bright overhead lights and the bored guy behind the counter making the night feel a little less heavy. Mara called the owner, then the police. Her voice stayed steady, but her hands shook while she held the phone. She told them what we saw and heard without making it sound crazy, just that we thought someone might have gotten inside after we locked up. The police showed up about 20 minutes later, 2 officers who took notes and said they'd go check the building. We followed them back in separate cars. The cafe was dark again when we got there. They went inside with flashlights and came out 10 minutes later, saying the place was empty. Doors locked. Nothing disturbed except a few chairs that might have been moved when we were cleaning. They said it was probably the building settling, or a raccoon, or the wind, and to call if anything else happened. Their voices had that tone like they'd heard this before from people who worked nights and let the quiet get to them. We left after that. Mara drove me to my apartment because I didn't want to go back to the cafe alone, even just to get my car. She stayed for a while, sitting on the couch while I made coffee neither of us drank. The TV was on low with some late-night show neither of us watched. She told me she'd felt something off all night too. The way the air felt wrong, the car across the street, the shadow, that she'd never seen the cafe look the way it did when the lights came on with no one inside. I didn't sleep much that night. Every sound in my apartment made me sit up. When I went back to work the next day, the place looked normal in the daylight. Chairs down, counters clean. The owner saying the police had checked everything and found nothing. I still work there, but I don't close anymore. Not alone, and not on Mondays. When the shift ends, I make sure someone walks out with me to the car, and I check the back seat before I get in. The nights feel different now. Longer, even when I'm home. The quiet in my apartment reminds me of the quiet in the cafe when the lights came on by themselves and the shadow moved behind the counter. I don't know what was in there, or how it got inside, or why it waited until we were almost gone. But I know the feeling of being watched in a place that should be empty, and I know I'm not putting myself in that spot again. Mara still closes sometimes, but she always takes someone with her now. When we talk about that night, we keep it short. Just enough to admit it happened, not enough to make it real again. The cafe is still there. The coffee's still good. Customers still come in. But for me, the place changed that night. The way the empty tables and dark windows look when the last light goes off. I can't unsee the shadow, or unhear the scrape, or forget how my hand shook when I locked the door knowing something was waiting inside. If you ever work a closing shift in a small place like that, pay attention to the cars across the street and the way the lights behave when no one's supposed to be inside. Check the cameras twice. Listen when the building makes a sound it shouldn't. And if you feel that heaviness in the air, that sense that the quiet is holding its breath, don't wait to see what happens next. Get out. Don't look back. Some things you can't lock out, no matter how many times you turn the key. I learned that the hard way. Now the nights are for sleeping, not for standing in empty rooms wondering who else is there with you. I don't know how much longer I can keep this inside without it eating me alive. It's 4:17 in the morning. The library is dead quiet. Just the fan on this old computer humming in the corner, and the occasional creak from the plastic chair every time I shift my weight. The keys stick a little under my fingers, like someone spilled something on this keyboard years ago. My hands won't stop moving, so I'm just going to type the whole thing out the way it happened. If I don't, the thoughts will keep looping around in my head until I lose it completely. I won't be able to close my eyes without seeing those monitors glowing in the dark, replaying every little thing that didn't add up. I'll remember how I sat there for hours, telling myself it was all just equipment quirks and tired patience, until the hours piled up and the quiet got so thick I could feel it pressing on my chest. In the end, the only way out was to do exactly what the paper said, even when none of it made any sense. Last night, I pulled into the parking lot of the sleep diagnostics unit right around 11. The building is this low, flat structure tucked at the far edge of the hospital campus, where the main parking lot lights start to fade and the trees from the hills behind it crowd right up to the fence line. I killed the engine and sat there for a minute, listening to the soft ticking as it cooled. The idea of walking in alone already felt heavier than it should have for a first shift. The side door was unlocked, just like they said it would be. Inside, The hallway smelled like sharp industrial cleaner mixed with that faint dampness you get in older medical wings that never quite dry out. I followed the signs to the control room, pushed the door open, and there was Keiko. She was already standing there, coat half on, bag slung over her shoulder, like she'd been counting the minutes until I showed up. She didn't waste time on small talk. She just pointed at the chair and said the patients were all wired up and stable and that the handover notes were on the desk. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of lined notebook paper. It looked like it had been carried around for weeks, the edges soft and frayed from handling. She dropped it in front of me and told me to read every single line right then, while she was still there. "These aren't the official protocols from the training packet," she said. "These are the ones that actually matter if you want to make it through the night without things getting sideways." She added that the last new tech, the one who'd started a couple months back, hadn't followed them all the way. He ended up leaving before sunrise, looking like he hadn't slept in weeks. I unfolded the paper under the desk lamp. 6 short points, each one written in the same small, neat handwriting. Keiko stood there watching me the whole time, her eyes tired but serious. When I was done, she picked up her bag and walked out without another word. I heard her footsteps fade down the hallway, then the outer door click shut, then the crunch of gravel under her tires. After that, it was just me, the low hum of the 6 monitors, and the soft click of the air system cycling on and off. I sat down and read the points again, trying to make sense of why they felt so specific. But at first, the night went exactly the way training had described. Check each screen every 15 minutes. Note the sleep stages in the system. Make sure the electrodes stay connected. Around midnight, I reset one loose lead on room 5 from the control panel without going into the room. The patients were all middle-aged or older, the usual overnight crowd. The guy in room 1 snored steadily. The patient in room 3 shifted around every so often, the way people do when they're fighting to stay under. The control room stayed dim, lit mostly by the monitor's glow. The building felt bigger than it really was, because there was no one else on the unit after Keiko left. No footsteps in the hallway, no voices from a nurse's station, just that particular kind of quiet that presses in when you're the only one awake for miles. Around 12:30, I remembered one of the points. Make sure the main corridor lights are turned down to the lowest setting. I stood up and walked out of the control room, my rubber soles squeaking a little on the tile. The hallway stretched straight ahead, doors on both sides. I walked down to the panel at the far end and clicked the dimmer switch down until the overheads dropped to a gray sort of glow. It made the red exit sign at the end look almost too bright. I stood there for a minute, looking into each room through the small windows, patients under their sheets, one woman's arm hanging off the side of the bed, another man lying perfectly flat, like he hadn't moved since they hooked him up. The air in the corridor felt cooler than in the control room. Through a cracked door, I could hear the faint sound of someone breathing. A slow, steady rhythm that should have been calming, but somehow wasn't. I walked back to the desk slower than I needed to, checking the time on my phone twice, even though the system clock was right there. My shoulders were already starting to ache from sitting so still, so I did another lap of the hallway just to get my blood moving. The gray light made the floor tiles look dull. Near the far end, the air smelled more like damp concrete. On one door handle, there was a tiny scratch that caught the light when I passed. It felt important for no good reason. I remember that. The night kept dragging after that in the way night shifts do. Every minute stretched thin. At 1:15, the intercom from room 3 gave a quick burst of static, like someone had pressed the call button for half a second and then let go. I stared at the speaker, waiting for a voice or another click, but nothing came. On the monitor, the patient still lay there, eyes closed, chest rising and falling. I typed it into the log the way one of the points said, "Note every anomaly, even if it seems minor." Then I left it at that. But the quiet after the static felt thicker, like the room had swallowed the sound and was holding it. I stood up to stretch, rolling my neck, and walked the 3 steps to the water cooler in the corner. The plastic cup crackled loud in the stillness when I filled it. I drank it standing there, leaning against the wall, because sitting back down felt too much like surrendering to the tiredness settling into my bones. I walked the hallway again, this time all the way to the break room at the other end. I flipped on the light just long enough to see the empty chairs and the coffee machine, then turned it off again. One of the points said, "No caffeine after 2," and even though it was only 1:30, that rule was already repeating in my head. Back at the desk, I watched the screens. Around 1:40, room 4's heart rate line started climbing. It went past 110 and kept going for almost a full minute. The beeps on the speaker sped up, sharp and insistent, but the camera showed him still asleep on his side, one hand twitching a little against the sheet. I stayed in the chair, watching the numbers, my fingers hovering over the mouse, ready to call for help. But another point said not to enter the room, so I waited. Eventually, the heart rate settled back down like nothing had happened. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't quite take a full breath. I told myself it was just the late hour and the isolation. I paced the control room, walking from the desk to the door and back, counting tiles under my feet. It gave me something to do without actually leaving. Then I did another full hallway walk, checking every door handle, even though they were all locked from the outside. The air felt even cooler out there, and the exit sign buzzed softly, like it had been all night. I stood at the end of the hall for a long minute, listening to the building settle around me. The small pops and hums old structures make when everything else is quiet. By 2:30, the tiredness was deeper. My eyes felt gritty. My thoughts blurred at the edges. I kept thinking about the coffee machine in the break room, but that line on the paper, "No caffeine after 2, stuck. So I drank more water instead, flat and metallic. I paced again, all the way to the end of the unit hallway and back, twice. The quiet was starting to feel like it had weight. Then the patient in room 2 started talking in his sleep. The mic picked it up clear through the speaker. At first, it was just mumbled words, nothing special. Then he said my full name. Not the shortened version I use now. The full name I had only written on the employment forms. No one at the hospital knew it, not even Keiko. He said it twice, slow and careful, like he was reading it off a paper. Then he added something about the blue sedan I drove in with, and how the drive from the highway must have felt long for someone working their first night. I froze with my hand on the mouse. I replayed the words in my head. There was no way he could know any of that. On the monitor, he looked completely asleep. His face was relaxed, his lips barely moved. I typed the entry into the system exactly the way the point said to, possible artifact. Then I kept watching. Still, the words echoed. I found myself leaning closer to the screen, studying his face like there might be some clue there. The isolation made every little sound stand out. The hum of the computers, the occasional rustle from a patient on one of the feeds, the way the air system would kick on, and suddenly the room felt stuffier. I got up and walked the hallway again, stopping longer at each room's window this time. I listened to the breathing patterns. I noticed how room 1's data kept glitching for a second or two, showing brain waves that looked too active for the deep sleep stage the camera said he was in. When I zoomed the feed, he was completely still, hands at his sides. I watched him breathe for a full minute, waiting for something, anything, to change. Nothing did. My shoes sounded louder on the way back to the control room. Every squeak echoed. Around 3, the call button light for room 6 started flashing. On the camera, the woman in there sat up and looked around the room, like she was searching for something. Her hand moved toward the button again. I reset it from the panel. The light went off, then came back on. It happened 3 times in 10 minutes. On the screen, she moved under the sheet, her head turning side to side. Once, she looked straight into the camera, her eyes open but unfocused, like she was looking through it. I stayed in my chair, logging every reset just like the point said. My fingers hit the keys harder than they needed to. The weight in my chest kept growing, the kind that makes it hard to breathe all the way in. Little things stopped lining up. Room 1's data glitched again, this time longer. Room 5's electrode readings dipped, then spiked, even though the patient didn't move at all. I pulled the folded paper out of my pocket and read the last point again. The one about what to do if the data didn't match the video at the end of the shift. It still didn't make sense, but I put it back. The shift wasn't over yet. I walked the hallway again, checking every door handle, then went into the break room and stood there in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. When I got back, my steps felt heavier. My thoughts were slower. 5 o'clock came, and the handover tech never showed. I tried my badge on the unit door. The lock stayed red. No click, no green light. I picked up the phone on the desk and dialed the main number. It rang through to an automated message. The line was experiencing high volume. I sat there, staring at the monitors. The patients were all still asleep. The lines had gone strangely steady. Outside the small control room window, the first gray light of morning was leaking into the parking lot. Then the phone rang. It was an internal line. I answered, and it was Keiko. Her voice sounded like she was driving, maybe with the window cracked. Traffic hissed in the background. She said she was sorry, but the system had flagged several mismatches in the overnight data. According to her, the night wasn't officially over until I fixed them. The funding for the whole unit depended on clean records, she said. The last new tech had done the same thing, staying after, changing entries until the numbers lined up the way the research grants needed them to. She kept talking. She explained that the unit ran side studies sometimes, collecting extra information the patients never knew about, because the consent forms were worded just vague enough. The techs ended up protecting the data because without the grants, the whole place would shut down. She mentioned almost casually that one of the guys who'd quit after a night like mine was now back under a different name, as a patient. He'd slept in room 3 last week. She said it like this was just how things worked. If I didn't make the changes, she told me, the incident report would flag my file, and the job would be over before it really started. I sat there with the receiver pressed so tight to my ear it hurt. Behind me, the monitors hummed. The lines looked harmless, almost innocent. And I realized the sacrifice the note hinted at wasn't some big dramatic thing. It was smaller and meaner than that. It was the part of me that still believed this job was just about watching people sleep and writing down what actually happened. I opened the log file, then I started going through each entry, one by one. I changed the heart rate spike to a normal variation. I edited the sleep talking note so it said possible equipment artifact. I adjusted the brainwave glitches to match what the video feed should have shown. The cursor blinked steadily while I typed lies that felt too small to matter, and somehow worse because of that. Each one tightened the knot in my stomach. My hands shook a little, so I kept going back over the first few entries to make sure they looked clean. I kept thinking about the guy who ended up as a patient. How many nights had he sat here, doing the same thing before he broke? When I got to the note about room 2 saying my name, I paused. I stared at it for a long time before I changed it. Outside, the sun was all the way up. Cars were starting to move through the parking lot. When I finally saved the last revision and hit submit, the unit door lock clicked. Green light. Open. I grabbed my bag and walked out without waiting for anyone. The folded paper was still in my pocket. Behind me, the control room stayed lit, the screen still glowing. I quit the next day over the phone. But the feeling didn't leave. It's still there whenever I close my eyes. The way the patient said my name. The way the data sometimes looked like it was tracking my own pulse. The way Keiko sounded on the phone. Like she'd done this exact thing before and would keep doing it. The unit is still running. They're still taking new patients every week. New techs walk in at 11, thinking it'll be simple. Just watch the monitors, write things down, go home tired. I wonder how many of them have sat in that same chair and made the same changes, sacrificing the question of why any of it is necessary in the first place. I haven't slept more than a couple hours at a time since. When I do, I dream about the screens. The lines move in patterns that look too much like sentences, like they're spelling something out I can almost, but not quite read. I don't know what they're really doing with all that extra information. Maybe they sell it to some research company. Maybe it's being used for something else entirely. What I do know is that the 6 points keep everything quiet, and I became part of that quiet, just to get out the door that morning. That's the part that keeps me here now, typing at 4 a.m. If I don't get it out, it feels like that sacrifice took more than I ever meant to give. I'm not sure how much of me is still left that hasn't been changed. The library lights outside are starting to come on. People will be showing up soon for the early shift. But the weight is still sitting in my chest. This slow, quiet dread that this could happen to anyone who takes a night job thinking it'll just be watching monitors and going home tired. I needed to get it all out. Maybe now I can try to close my eyes without seeing the numbers climbing, the static right before my name came through, and that final click of the lock after I hit save, like the building itself had been waiting for me to give in. I keep thinking about how every hallway walk felt a little longer than the last, how the water tasted worse each time, and how I kept checking that paper even after I knew every word by heart. I don't know how much longer I can keep this inside without it eating me alive. It's 4:27 in the morning now, and the library is dead quiet. Just the fan on this old computer humming in the corner and the plastic chair creaking every time I shift my weight. My back is stiff from sitting here too long. The keys stick sometimes from whatever got spilled on them years ago, but my fingers won't stop moving across this keyboard, so I'm just going to type the whole thing out exactly the way it happened. If I don't, the thoughts will keep looping until I lose it completely. I won't be able to close my eyes without seeing that girl's calm face every time I blink, or hearing the way she said my mother's maiden name like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, or the way she knew about the spare key under the mat, and the sleeping pills in my glove compartment, and the way she looked at me right before they wheeled her out and said the voice would be watching. The security guard already told me they close in 8 minutes, but I need to get this all out before the dread settles any deeper. Maybe if I type it, it won't keep spinning in my head all night. Maybe it will stop the loop of every small thing that added up until the whole shift felt like it was never just a regular night. The shift started at 11. The ER was pretty quiet, just a couple of regulars in the waiting area. One guy was sleeping off whatever he'd taken earlier, and an old lady was complaining about her stomach. I did the usual rounds, checking vitals, charting notes, walking the full length of the hallway to the supply room and back twice, just to keep from sitting too long. Sitting makes the night drag. The rain started around midnight, coming down hard against the windows, that steady drumming sound filling the quiet spaces between the monitor beeps. After I restocked the crash cart, I walked the hallway again. The overhead lights hummed a little louder near the far end. The floor felt cooler by the ambulance doors. One of the curtain rings in Bay 2 was loose, rattling every time the air system kicked on. At 1:45, the doors burst open. The paramedics wheeled in this girl, maybe 13 or 14. Her clothes were covered in mud with some blood on her arms and legs. She was sitting up on the gurney, eyes open and focused, not crying or shaking, just watching everything like she was waiting for the next thing to happen. The two officers with them said they'd responded to a 911 call from the house. They found her parents in the living room, dead from what looked like blunt force trauma. The girl had been in the backyard shed when they arrived, phone still clutched in her hand. She'd told the dispatcher that the voice said to hide there until help came. I started cutting away the torn parts of her clothes to check the scrapes while she sat there perfectly still. When I asked her name, she said Sarah, and then added that the voice had told her my name before we even met. I figured it was shock talking, so I kept working, cleaning the cuts, wrapping them. Her vitals stayed steady, heart rate normal, blood pressure fine, like she'd come in for a minor injury instead of what she'd just lived through. I walked the hallway right after that, the tile squeaking under my shoes, the rain pounding harder. When I got back, the detective had shown up. His name was Ruiz. He looked tired, tie loose, notebook already open. He started questioning Sarah right there in the bay while I was still adjusting her bandage. She told him about the voice telling her to hide. When he asked if she'd seen anyone, she said no, because the voice made her go out the back door. Ruiz wrote it all down, then asked if she had any brothers or sisters. She said no, but that the voice was like a big brother sometimes. Ruiz glanced at me, like he was already deciding this would be one of those long nights. I told him maybe give her a minute, but he kept going. Sarah gave him a phone number for the voice. Ruiz stepped out to call it and came back saying the voicemail said, "This is the voice, leave a message." Sarah nodded and said sometimes it answers and tells her what to do. I could see Ruiz getting frustrated. His pen started tapping harder on the notebook. I had to step out to check on the old lady with the stomach pain. She was still complaining. still restless. I walked the hallway again, all the way to the end and back, noticing how the lights hummed louder in the quiet, how the floor felt colder near the far doors, how the rain was starting to pool under the ambulance bay doors. When I came back, Ruiz was still there, asking the same questions. Sarah stuck to her story. I walked the hallway 3 more times after that, each lap feeling a little longer. The rain never let up. Every time I passed Sarah's bay, she was sitting there, looking at the curtain like she knew someone was coming. Ruiz came back looking paler and went in again, asking more questions, this time about the shed and how long she waited. Sarah said, "The voice told me exactly when to call." Ruiz started rubbing his chest. I told him to step out and get some air, but he said he was fine. Then Sarah looked at me and said, "The voice says you should check the man in Bay 4, because the voice says his oxygen will drop soon." I didn't want to, but I went anyway. Sure enough, the guy's sats had dropped. I called respiratory, got him stabilized. When I came back, Sarah was reading one of the old magazines from the waiting area, like nothing had happened. Ruiz went in one more time, voice raised now. He told her she needed to be honest because the crime scene showed no forced entry and the prints on the weapon were being processed. Sarah just tilted her head and said, "The voice told me you would get loud and that you have a bad heart from the donuts." Ruiz laughed it off, but 10 minutes later, while he was on the phone in the hallway, I heard him start coughing hard. Then the sound of him leaning against the wall. When I ran out, he was on his knees, clutching his chest, breathing funny. The other officer called for help. By the time they got him stable and took him back for tests, Sarah was still sitting in her bed. When I went back in, she said, "The voice said that would happen if he yelled at me." I just stood there, staring at her. She looked up at me and said, "You should go home soon, because your apartment key is missing from under the mat." My stomach dropped. I'd checked that morning. It was there. After that, I walked the hallway again. 4 full laps this time. I stopped at the vending machine for water because my mouth was dry. The rain kept drumming on the roof and the concrete outside. When I got back, Ruiz had returned from tests, looking even paler. He went straight into Sarah's bay, sitting this time, face gray. He started in on the voice again, louder now, saying the phone number belonged to a burner and nobody else lived in the house. Sarah said, "The voice protects me." Ruiz slammed his notebook down on the tray table and snapped, "Enough with the stories, kid." I stepped in, reminding him she was a minor and still in shock, but he kept pushing. He asked if she thought the voice could have hurt her parents. She said, "No, it only hurts people who hurt me." Ruiz leaned in closer to the bed. Sarah looked at him and said, "The voice says your wife left because of the gambling." Ruiz froze for a second. Then he backed up and walked out of the bay without a word. I followed him into the hallway and asked if he was okay. He just shook his head and said, "This kid knows things she shouldn't." I told him maybe we should call child services now, but he said he needed more before they took her. I had to run to a code in Bay 6 after that. A guy seizing. I sprinted down the hall with the crash cart, the wheels rattling loud on the tile. We got him stable, but it took 20 minutes of pushing meds and holding him down while he thrashed. When I finally made it back to Sarah's bay, Ruiz was in there again, sitting in the chair, face ashen, asking her about the shed and how long she'd waited. Sarah repeated, "The voice told me exactly when to call." Ruiz started rubbing his chest again. I told him to step out and get some air. He insisted he was fine. Then Sarah looked at me and said, "The voice says you should check on the woman in Bay 2 because she's about to pull her IV." Sure enough, when I walked over, the old lady was tugging at the line. I got it secured. When I came back, Sarah said, "The voice says your mother used to call you by your middle name when you were little." I've never told anyone at work that. That was when the dread started to really settle, not from anything jumping out at me, but from the slow way all the little things kept lining up. I walked the hallway one more time, all the way to the ambulance bay and back twice, stopping to listen to the rain. It sounded different near the doors, like it was trying to get in. When I returned, the grandmother had arrived from the next town over. She was standing in the bay, talking quietly to Sarah. Ruiz was on the phone in the hallway, looking worse than ever. Sarah looked at me over her grandmother's shoulder and said, The voice says thank you for believing me, even a little. I stood there in the bay for a long minute, the rain still pounding, the floor still damp where the paramedics had tracked in mud. I walked the hallway one last time before clocking out at 6, checking every bay twice. The dread was heavy now. The rain had finally slowed to a drizzle. When I got to my car, the spare key really was gone from under the mat. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The voice says drive safe. I deleted it and blocked the number, but the feeling stayed. I drove home checking the mirrors the whole way. When I got inside, I locked the door and sat on the couch for hours, staring at the wall. The thought that a kid who just lost everything could sit there so calm and know things about my life that no one else does. That's the kind of thing that makes the quiet of the night shift feel like it was never quiet at all. Now the library guard is walking over, so I have to stop typing. But the weight is still here. I just needed to get it all out. So maybe now I can try to close my eyes without hearing that calm voice in my head, saying the same thing she said right before they wheeled her away, that the voice would be watching to make sure I didn't tell anyone the wrong parts. The speaker crackled at exactly 3:17 in the morning. The voice used my full name, my new apartment number, and ordered the same complicated combo. No pickles, extra sauce on the side, large Dr. Pepper, no ice. It told me to walk the bag out to the painted yellow line exactly 8 feet from the window, leave it there, back away slowly, and not look back. I stood there holding the headset, my hand already shaking. This was the 14th night in a row. The store was completely empty except for me, the low hum of the fryers, the distant rumble of trucks on the overpass, and the wind picking up outside, rattling the hedges. I knew that if I didn't do it exactly right, the night would get longer, the sounds would start earlier, and I'd end up checking every lock twice and still not feel safe when I finally got in my car at 6. So I bagged it fast and walked it out the door into the lane, the cold air hitting my face, the hedges looking darker than usual. I set the bag down and backed away, counting the steps. I got back inside, locked the window, and stood there watching the camera feed. The bag sitting there alone, the lane empty, the hedges still. For a minute nothing happened, then the bag was gone. The scraping started low and slow from the far side of the building. I grabbed the flashlight and walked the full length of the store, from the front counter through the kitchen, past the freezers to the side door, checking the lock and the handle. The camera on that side showed nothing, but the scraping kept moving, keeping pace with me along the exterior wall. I spun around and walked back the other way, through the dining area to the drive-thru window. The scraping followed. I stood there listening until it stopped. Then I walked the whole store again, because sitting still felt worse and the night had barely started. I walked it a third time, stopping at every window and every door, listening for any change. Then a fourth time, because the scraping started again when I stopped moving. I kept going like that for the next hour, checking the stockroom twice, the office 3 times, the back freezer 4 times, and each time the scraping followed exactly where I went. When I finally sat down at the counter, the voice came through the speaker, even though the lane was empty, saying, "Good boy." I jumped up and walked the store again, 5 more times, until the sun started coming up and the phone in my pocket buzzed with the store number. I didn't answer. The dread was already sitting heavy in my chest, the kind that makes your shoulders ache and your thoughts slow down like they're wading through mud. I took the shift because the manager said the regular guy had walked out. They needed someone reliable for the slow hours. The pay bumped up a little, and I needed the money after the transmission repair and the rent increase. The place sits out here at this dead highway exit where the only other lights are the truck stop 2 miles down and the empty car dealership lot across the way. The drive-thru lane curves long around the building, with tall, thick hedges on the outer side that block the highway lamps and make the whole lane feel cut off from everything. After midnight, the orders slow to almost nothing and the store is mine alone. The quiet gets so thick it presses on your ears. I spent the first couple of nights walking the floor from the front counter to the back freezer, checking the side door and the stock room and the cameras that show the empty lot and the lane. The black sedan showed up right at 3:17. The voice gave the order, and I bagged it and walked it out to the yellow line, set it down, backed away fast, got back inside, and locked the window. I watched on the camera as the bag disappeared a minute later without any car pulling up. The lane stayed empty. The hedges rustled a little, but I told myself it was the wind. I walked the store twice after that, checking every door. The feeling was there, but small. I went home and slept okay. The next night, the same thing happened, but the voice added something about the argument I'd had with my brother on the phone the night before. I'd never mentioned that to anyone at work. I started checking the cameras more. The footage showed the sedan, but the plates were always caked in mud and the interior stayed dark. After it left, I walked the lane with the flashlight. The bag was gone. The pavement was clean, but the hedges looked pushed aside, like something bigger than a person had moved through them. I heard the scraping sound then. I whipped the light toward the hedges, but nothing was there. I ran back inside and locked the window tighter. The rest of the shift, I kept looking at the lane, waiting for it to come back. I walked the store 4 times that night, checking the side door twice each time, and the back freezer, and the office, and the dining area. The scraping followed me along the walls each time I moved. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, listening, until it stopped, then started again when I walked to the front. The night dragged like that until 6. I walked the store one more time before clocking out, because the scraping had started again when I sat down to do the final report. The wind had picked up, making the hedges shake harder, and the scraping sounded closer. I stood at the side door for 10 minutes, holding the handle, waiting for the pressure to build, but it didn't. I walked again anyway, because stopping felt worse. I tried delaying the placement once, bagged the order and left the bag on the counter for 10 minutes. The lights in the dining room flickered and the fryer in the back made a loud pop. When I went to check, the wrappers were torn open and the food was scattered across the counter, like someone had reached in without me seeing. The Dr. Pepper was spilled everywhere. I cleaned it up fast because a regular car came through right after, and I told myself it was coincidence, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking for hours. At 3:17, the voice came through quieter and said, "I knew better than that, and to do it right next time." I followed the routine. The bag disappeared like always, but the dread was heavier. I spent the night moving between the front and the back, checking every lock. The cameras showed nothing. The lane was empty, the hedges still. I walked the store 6 times that night, each lap taking longer because I stopped at every window and every door to listen. The scraping started earlier this time and followed me the whole way. I ended up in the office with the door locked, sitting on the floor listening until it moved away. Then I walked again. The pattern kept going until the sun came up. I walked the store 2 more times right before clocking out because the scraping had started again when I sat down. The phone rang with the store number. I didn't answer. I sat in my car in the lot for 20 minutes, checking the mirrors before driving home, because the sedan had headed in the direction of my exit again, and the scraping sound stayed in my head the whole drive. One night I took my phone with me when I placed the bag and tried to record the lane. The flash didn't go off. The battery died right then, even though it had been full. I ran back inside and the scraping started from both sides of the building. I locked everything and stayed away from the windows. The power flickered twice, and I had to walk through the dark kitchen to the breaker box, the flashlight beam jumping on the walls, the sound of something moving outside, keeping pace with me along the exterior wall. Something dragging. When I reset the breaker, the lights came back, but the dragging had moved to the drive-thru window. I stayed in the back office for the next hour, listening. Then I walked the store again, and the dragging followed. I ran to the side door and held the handle. The pressure built on the other side. I yelled at it to stop. The pressure eased. When I walked back to the front, the sedan was back at the speaker. The voice said, "Next time, put it right." I walked the store 8 times after that, checking every single lock and every camera feed. The footage showed the hedges moving and a shadow that wasn't the wind. The night kept going like that until I was exhausted. The manager finally called back and said he was coming in early the next night to see for himself. I walked the store 2 more times after the call because the scraping had started again when I hung up, and the voice came through the speaker saying, "Good boy." I kept walking. The dread was making my legs feel heavy and my thoughts slow. I kept thinking about how the voice knew the exact argument I'd had with my brother and my new apartment number, and that I'd been late on rent last month. I walked the store again because stopping felt like giving it time to get closer. The manager showed up at 2. He was annoyed the whole time, complaining about the overtime. I made him stand by the window when 3:17 came. When the voice gave the order, he laughed at first, until it used his wife's name and mentioned the text he'd sent her that morning. His face changed. He told me to do the routine. This time, when I placed the bag, the movement in the hedges was louder and closer. When I backed away, something heavy hit the side of the building. The manager went to the window to look. The banging started. Louder now. We both ended up pushing tables against the doors, moving through the store, turning off lights, hiding in the office, listening to the sounds circling the building and the voice coming through the speaker, saying we were making it harder than it needed to be. The power went out completely. We sat in the dark for what felt like hours, the manager whispering that he'd heard stories but never believed them. When the emergency lights kicked in, we could hear the dragging sound getting closer to the front. We moved again, barricading the front counter. The night dragged on like that, us moving from room to room, securing every entry point while the presence kept testing the building. By the time the sun came up, the bag was gone. The manager said he would handle it, but I could tell he was as scared as I was. He didn't show up for his shift the next day. The district guy called and said the manager had quit and they needed me to cover until they found someone. I said no, but the calls kept coming. I walked the store 10 times after hanging up, because the scraping started when I put the phone down and the voice came through the speaker again saying, "Good boy." I kept walking. The dread made my chest tight and my breathing short. I kept checking the cameras every 2 minutes. The shadow was closer on the footage. I walked the store again and again until 6. I came back anyway because the district guy said if I didn't cover, he'd write me up. The routine started the same, but this time, when I placed the bag, I left a note inside. "Who are you?" When the bag disappeared, the scraping started immediately. I grabbed the flashlight and ran out into the lane. The hedges were shaking hard. I swept the light along the branches and heard the breathing right behind them. I backed up fast and tripped over the curb. The scraping followed. I scrambled up and ran for the window. The sedan was already at the speaker. The voice said the note was cute, but told me not to do that again. The night dragged with me checking the cameras every 3 minutes. The footage showed the hedges moving and a shadow getting closer to the building. I walked the store 10 times that night, each lap stopping at every door and listening. The scraping kept pace. I ended up barricaded in the office again. The voice came through the speaker, even though the lane was empty, saying, "Good boy." I walked the store again after that. The pattern kept repeating until 6. I walked the store 2 more times right before clocking out because the scraping had started again when I sat down. The phone rang with the store number. I didn't answer. I sat in my car in the lot for 30 minutes, checking the mirrors before driving home because the scraping sound was still in my head and the dread was making it hard to keep my eyes on the road. I tried leaving the bag further back inside the window, about 5 feet in. When 3:17 came, the voice gave the order. I placed the bag and backed away. The window started rattling like something was pushing on it from the outside. I grabbed the broom and stood there, ready. The rattling got harder. The glass bowed a little. I yelled at it to stop. The rattling stopped. The bag disappeared. The scraping started from the side door. I ran to the back and checked the lock. It was still secure, but the door handle was turning slowly. I held it from the inside. The pressure kept building. I yelled again. The handle stopped. I ran to the front. The sedan was gone, but the voice came through the speaker one more time saying, "Good boy." The night dragged with me moving from door to door, holding handles and checking cameras. The footage showed the hedges shaking and the shadow getting closer. I kept the lights on full and walked the entire store every 10 minutes. By the end of the shift, I was exhausted. The district guy called again and said they were hiring someone new, but until then I had to cover. I walked the store 12 times after the call because the scraping started when I hung up and the voice came through the speaker again saying, "Good boy." I kept walking. The dread made my legs feel like lead and my mind loop on how the voice knew my brother's name, my rent situation, the exact fight I'd had with my ex last year. I walked the store again to push the thoughts away, but they kept coming. I called the district guy again and told him everything. He said he would send someone, but no one came. I showed up anyway. The routine started. When I placed the bag, the hedges started shaking before I even got back inside. I ran to the window and locked it, and the banging started on the side door. I ran there and held the handle. The pressure built. I yelled, and it eased. I ran back to the front. The scraping was already at the drive-thru window. I stood there listening. The voice came through the speaker saying, "Put it right next time." I walked the store 12 times after that, each lap faster because the sounds were following closer. I ended up in the office with the door locked and the lights off, listening until 6. I walked the store 2 more times right before clocking out because the scraping had started again when I sat down. The phone rang with the store number. I didn't answer. The district guy finally showed up at 1. He was pissed the whole time. I made him stand by the window, and when 3:17 came, the voice gave the order and used his daughter's name and the school she went to. His face changed. He told me to do the routine. This time, when I placed the bag, the movement was immediate and heavy. The banging started on both sides at once. We pushed tables and chairs against every door and moved through the store, turning off lights and hiding. The voice kept coming through the speaker. The power flickered, then went out. We sat in the dark, listening to the dragging circling the building. When the emergency lights came on, the sounds were closer. We moved again, barricading more. The night went on like that until the sun came up. The district guy said he would close the night shift, but the calls kept coming anyway. I walked the store 14 times after he left because the scraping started when he drove away, and the voice came through the speaker saying, "Good boy." I kept walking. The dread made my hands shake and my breathing come in short bursts. I kept thinking about how the voice knew the district guy's daughter, how it knew my bank balance was low, how it knew I'd been skipping meals to save money. I walked the store again and again to push the thoughts away. I showed up because the rent was due. The routine started, and the scraping began before I even placed the bag. I walked the store 15 times that night, running from sound to sound, holding handles and checking cameras. The shadow on the footage kept getting closer. The voice kept talking through the speaker, even when the lane was empty. I ended up barricaded in the office again, listening until 6. I walked the store 3 more times right before clocking out because the scraping had started again when I sat down. The phone rang with the store number. I didn't answer. I tried not placing the bag at all. The lights flickered non-stop. The fryers popped. Wrappers flew off the counter. The Dr. Pepper spilled again. The scraping started everywhere at once. I ran from room to room, holding doors, and the voice came through the speaker saying I knew better. I walked the store 20 times that night, the sounds following every step. I barely made it to 6. I walked the store 4 more times right before clocking out because the scraping had started again when I sat down and the phone rang with the store number. I didn't answer. I sat in my car in the lot for 40 minutes, checking the mirrors before driving home, because the dread was making it hard to keep my hands steady on the wheel. The district guy called again and said they were hiring someone new, but until then I had to cover. The routine started. The banging and scraping and dragging all happened at once. I spent the whole night moving, barricading, listening, walking, checking. The voice kept talking. The shadow on the cameras kept moving closer. When 6 came, I sat in my car for an hour before driving home, checking the mirrors the whole way. The phone is ringing again right now. I know it's the store number. I know if I answer, the voice will be there, waiting for me to say yes. The dread is sitting so heavy I can barely type this. The scraping is starting outside my window now, even though I'm not at the store. I just needed to get it all out so maybe the looping would stop. But it won't, because the shift never really ended, and the voice is still waiting, and the wind is rattling the glass, and I keep walking the room in my head, checking every lock even though I'm home. The dread is making my fingers slow and my thoughts ramble, and I know the phone will keep ringing and the voice will keep knowing things, and I will keep walking and checking and listening until I can't anymore. The gravel crunched too loud under my boots as I ducked low behind the row of new trucks. The wind whipped through the empty lot, making the price tags flap hard against the windshields. The floodlights cast long shadows that made every car look like it was leaning in to watch me. I could hear his footsteps getting closer, slow and steady on the loose stones, and his voice calling my name in that same warm, polite tone that used to make the long, empty hours feel almost bearable. I knew if I stayed still, he would find me, and if I ran, he would chase. The dealership was completely empty except for me. The low buzz of the security lights, the distant hum of the highway, and the way the chain-link fence rattled every time the gusts hit it. I pressed my back against the cold tire and held my breath because the raise was never about the money. It was about keeping someone here to deal with him. The thoughts kept looping. How it all started with the $5 bump, how he seemed so normal at first, how the loneliness made me let him in. And now he was out there looking for me, and I had to get it all out before he found me, because the dread was too heavy to carry alone anymore. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the walkie, even though I knew no one was listening on the other end. I took the shift because the district manager pulled me aside after my regular day hours and said they were short on overnight coverage and the pay increase would help with the bills. I said yes because the money was good and the hours were quiet and the lot was always empty after 10. The first few weeks were just long hours walking the rows, checking doors, resetting cameras, and the occasional customer who needed a car fast. Then the silver sedan started showing up every night at the same time. The man inside would sit there for 20 minutes before getting out and walking the lot. He looked completely ordinary, mid-50s, neat hair, neat cardigan, polite smile. He would wave when he saw me through the glass, and I would wave back because it broke the quiet. After a few nights, he came inside. We talked about the cars and his job and his family. He brought coffee and sandwiches, and it felt good to have someone there because the loneliness was starting to get to me. He knew things about the inventory and about me too, like the kind of coffee I liked and the way I took the long way home. I told myself he was just observant. The nights got easier with him there. We walked the lot together and he pointed out little things on the cars and laughed at my jokes about the previous managers and their weird rules. He started calling me his night partner, and I laughed at that because it made the 8 hours feel less endless. The wind didn't seem as loud and the shadows didn't stretch as far, and I started looking forward to 317 when the sedan would pull in and he would get out and our routine would start. The nights kept going like that for weeks. He showed up. We walked the rows. He talked about his day, how the warehouse was stressing him out, how his wife didn't understand him, how the kids were always ignoring him. I listened because it passed the time. He brought lunch every night and we sat in the showroom. He showed me pictures on his phone, and it felt like having a friend. The lot felt less empty. The wind didn't seem as loud. Then, one night, a customer came in while he was there. The customer was jittery and paid cash. My friend went quiet and left early. The next night, he came back and his smile was the same, but his eyes looked different. He asked if I had talked to anyone else. I said no. He nodded, but his hand stayed on my shoulder a little too long. The dread started then, small, but there. I started checking the cameras more. The footage showed him walking the lot before he came inside. The silver sedan always parked in the same spot, the interior always dark. After he left, I walked the rows with the flashlight. The gravel looked disturbed. I heard footsteps sometimes even when he was gone. I started locking the doors earlier and keeping the walkie on even when it was silent. The nights started feeling longer and the quiet started pressing harder. I jumped at every little sound the wind made against the glass, at the way the price tags flapped, at the way the cars creaked when the temperature dropped. One night, he showed up early and knocked on the glass. I let him in because the knocking was loud. He said his wife had thrown him out and he needed to sit. I let him sit. He talked for hours about how no one understood him except me, how I was the only real friend he had, how the dealership was our place. I nodded because the lot was empty and the wind was loud. When he left the coffee cup. Inside it was a note with my home address. I stared at it, tore it up, and walked the lot 3 times. The footsteps followed me. I ran back inside and locked everything. The night dragged, with me moving from window to window. The knocking moved around the building. I stood in the middle of the showroom listening. The walkie crackled, and his voice came through saying he was sorry if he scared me. I stayed quiet. The knocking stopped. I walked the lot with the flashlight. The silver sedan was gone, but the gravel was disturbed all around. I ran back inside, and the dread was heavier. The night started feeling longer. The quiet started pressing harder. I jumped at every little sound the wind made against the glass, at the way the price tags flapped, at the way the cars creaked when the temperature dropped. I started carrying the walkie everywhere, even to the bathroom. I started leaving the lights on full, even though it made the lot look brighter and the shadows deeper. I started checking the cameras every 5 minutes, and the footage showed him there even on my days off, walking the rows alone, kicking tires, looking at the windows. The dread kept growing, slow and steady, like the scraping sound that started following me when I walked the lot after he left. The next night, he showed up with a paper bag and a coffee. He knocked and I let him in. He smiled wide and said he had fixed everything, that the family wouldn't bother us anymore. I asked what he meant. He set the bag down and said they had to go because they didn't understand our nights. I backed up. He followed, talking about how I was his real partner and how the cars were ours. I grabbed the walkie and pressed the button. He reached for my arm. I pulled away and ran for the side door. He followed. I slammed the door and ran into the lot. The floodlights made long shadows. I hid behind a row of SUVs. I could hear his footsteps on the gravel coming closer. He was whispering my name and saying I didn't need to be scared. I stayed low and moved to the next row. The footsteps followed. I ran again. He started running too. I could hear him breathing hard. He caught up near the back fence and grabbed my shoulder. I turned and swung the walkie. It hit his face. He stumbled. I ran again. He kept coming. I hid behind the big truck and he walked past, slow. I could see his shoes. He stopped, knelt down, looked at me, and smiled. "There you are." I kicked out and caught his knee. He fell. I scrambled up and ran for the road. He got up fast and chased me. I reached the gate and climbed over it, then kept running until I hit the highway. A truck slowed down and the driver called the police. They found him in the lot. The bag was still on the desk. The note inside had my full schedule written out for the next month. The police said he had been watching the lot for weeks. The dealership cameras showed him there every night, even on my days off. The manager called the next day and said the night shift was canceled, but the raise was still on the books if I wanted day hours. I said no. The dread is still here. Every time I close my eyes, I see the shadows between the cars and hear the footsteps on the gravel. The phone rings sometimes with no number, and I know it's the dealership line. I don't answer. The wait never leaves. The lot is still there. The cars are still there. The raise was never about the hours. It was about having someone there to keep the nights from getting too quiet. I keep thinking about how many other night workers are out there alone in places like that, and how easy it is for the quiet to turn into something that knows your name and follows you home. The wind is rattling the windows right now, and I keep checking the locks even though I'm not at the dealership. The dread is making my fingers slow and my thoughts ramble. I know the phone will keep ringing, the voice will keep knowing things, and I will keep walking and checking and listening until I can't anymore. The gravel crunched too loud under my boots as I ducked low behind the row of new trucks. The wind whipped through the empty lot, making the price tags flap hard against the windshields, and the floodlights cast long shadows that made every car look like it was leaning in to watch me. I could hear his footsteps getting closer, slow and steady on the loose stones, and his voice calling my name in that same warm, polite tone that used to make the long, empty hours feel almost bearable. I knew if I stayed still, he would find me, and if I ran, he would chase. The dealership was completely empty except for me, the low buzz of the security lights, the distant hum of the highway, and the way the chain-link fence rattled every time the gusts hit it. I pressed my back against the cold tire and held my breath, because the raise was never about the money. It was about keeping someone here to deal with him. The thoughts kept looping. How it all started with the $5 bump. How he seemed so normal at first. How the loneliness made me let him in. Now he was out there looking for me, and I had to get it all out before he found me. because the dread was too heavy to carry alone anymore. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the walkie, even though I knew no one was listening on the other end. The footsteps stopped for a second, then started again, closer. I moved low to the next truck. The shadow stretched long across the pavement. I could see his shoes under the chassis. He knelt down, slow, and looked right at me and smiled. "There you are." I kicked out hard and caught his shoulder. He fell back. I scrambled up and ran for the fence. He got up fast and chased me. I climbed the chain link and dropped to the other side, then kept running. The highway was close. The truck lights were bright. The driver slowed down and the police came. They found him still in the lot, sitting on the ground, holding his shoulder. The bag was still on the desk. The note inside had my full schedule written out for the next month. The police said he had been watching the lot for weeks. The dealership cameras showed him there every night, even on my days off. The manager called the next day and said the night shift was canceled, but the raise was still on the books if I wanted day hours. I said no. The dread is still here. Every time I close my eyes, I see the shadows between the cars and hear the footsteps on the gravel. The phone rings sometimes with no number, and I know it's the dealership line. I don't answer. The wait never leaves. The lot is still there. The cars are still there. The raise was never about the hours. It was about having someone there to keep the nights from getting too quiet. I keep thinking about how many other night workers are out there alone in places like that, and how easy it is for the quiet to turn into something that knows your name and follows you home. The wind is rattling the windows right now, and I keep checking the locks even though I'm not at the dealership. The dread is making my fingers slow and my thoughts ramble. I know the phone will keep ringing. The voice will keep knowing things, and I will keep walking and checking and listening until I can't anymore. The gravel crunched too loud under my boots as I ducked low behind the row of new trucks. The wind whipped through the empty lot, making the price tags flap hard against the windshields, and the floodlights cast long shadows that made every car look like it was leaning in to watch me. I could hear his footsteps getting closer, slow and steady on the loose stones, and his voice calling my name in that same warm, polite tone that used to make the long, empty hours feel almost bearable. I knew if I stayed still, he would find me, and if I ran, he would chase. The dealership was completely empty except for me, the low buzz of the security lights, the distant hum of the highway, and the way the chain-link fence rattled every time the gusts hit it. I pressed my back against the cold tire and held my breath, because the raise was never about the money. It was about keeping someone here to deal with him. The thoughts kept looping, how it all started with the $5 bump, how he seemed so normal at first, how the loneliness made me let him in. Now he was out there looking for me, and I had to get it all out before he found me, because the dread was too heavy to carry alone anymore. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the walkie, even though I knew no one was listening on the other end. The footsteps stopped for a second, then started again, closer. I moved low to the next truck. The shadow stretched long across the pavement. I could see his shoes under the chassis. He knelt down slow and looked right at me and smiled. "There you are." I kicked out hard and caught his shoulder. He fell back. I scrambled up and ran for the fence. He got up fast and chased me. I climbed the chain link and dropped to the other side, then kept running. The highway was close. The truck lights were bright. The driver slowed down and the police came. They found him still in the lot, sitting on the ground holding his shoulder. The bag was still on the desk. The note inside had my full schedule written out for the next month. The police said he had been watching the lot for weeks. The dealership cameras showed him there every night, even on my days off. The manager called the next day and said the night shift was canceled, but the raise was still on the books if I wanted day hours. I said no. The dread is still here. Every time I close my eyes, I see the shadows between the cars and hear the footsteps on the gravel. The phone rings sometimes with no number, and I know it's the dealership line. I don't answer. The wait never leaves. The lot is still there. The cars are still there. The raise was never about the hours. It was about having someone there to keep the nights from getting too quiet. I keep thinking about how many other night workers are out there alone in places like that, and how easy it is for the quiet to turn into something that knows your name and follows you home. The wind is rattling the windows right now, and I keep checking the locks even though I'm not at the dealership. The dread is making my fingers slow and my thoughts ramble. I know the phone will keep ringing, the voice will keep knowing things, and I will keep walking and checking and listening until I can't anymore. The bell went off at 2:43 a.m., and the voice on the other end knew the exact reason I'd started taking the night shift in the first place. It asked if the large fries were ready because the kids were getting restless in the back seat. Then it added that my sister would be proud I was finally eating something besides those nasty energy drinks on these shifts. I nearly dropped the headset right there. I had never told a single soul at this job about my sister, or the energy drinks, or anything personal. The parking lot was nothing but black except for those headlights way back by the exit ramp. The wind was howling through the empty drive-thru lane, pushing an empty cup across the concrete. I knew right then this shift was going to be the one that finally broke me. I took the order with my voice cracking and told him to pull forward. I started moving fast through the kitchen, dropping fresh baskets into the fryer even though I had just cleaned them. The oil hissed loud. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I poured the drink, bagged it all, and walked back to the window. The SUV was already there. The guy in the driver's seat looked normal enough. Mid-40s, neat hair, a jacket. He smiled when I slid the window open and handed him the bag. He said thanks and asked if I'd seen the news about the accident on the highway earlier. I said no. He nodded and drove off slow. The lot was empty again, but the dread was already there, small but growing. I walked the whole store, checking the back door, the side exit, the camera feeds. The night kept moving, but the quiet felt heavier than usual. I'd taken the shift at the highway rest stop coffee shop because the extra pay helped with the bills. The manager said it was easy money. Most nights it was just me and the occasional trucker stopping for a quick cup. The first few weeks were fine. I'd move between the counter and the kitchen and the back room, restocking cups, wiping down the machines, checking the cameras every 20 minutes. The parking lot stayed mostly empty after midnight. The highway hummed in the background. I spent the hours walking the floor from the front counter to the espresso machine to the fridge and back again, because sitting still made the hours stretch longer. Then the gray SUV started showing up every night at the same time. The guy would order the same thing, and we'd talk a little through the window. He seemed normal enough. He knew things about the menu and about the shifts, and about me too, like the way I took my breaks in the back room, and the argument I'd had with my girlfriend on the phone the week before. I told myself he must have overheard, but the window was closed most of the time. I started checking the cameras more. The footage showed the SUV pulling in and the guy just sitting there for a while before ordering. The interior always dark. I walked the lot after he left, flashlight in hand. The pavement looked normal, but the air felt colder near where he parked. I heard the footsteps sometimes, even when he was gone. I started locking the side door earlier and keeping the walkie on my belt, even when it was silent. The nights started feeling longer. The quiet started pressing harder. I started jumping at every little sound, the wind against the glass, the way the price signs flapped, the way the ice machine kicked on. One night the SUV pulled in early. The guy ordered, and when I brought the bag to the window, he asked if I'd seen the news about the family that crashed earlier that evening. I said no. He nodded and said they were heading home from a long trip and they never made it. That cold drop hit my stomach again. I asked how he knew. He smiled and said he saw it on the side of the road. I handed him the bag and he drove off. I walked the store checking every lock and every camera. The footage showed the SUV leaving, but the lot felt wrong after that. I kept moving from the front to the back to the kitchen, checking the fry timers and the drink machine and the stockroom. The footsteps started following me along the exterior wall. I ran to the side door and held the handle. Pressure built on the other side, like someone was leaning into it. I yelled at it to stop. The pressure eased. I walked back to the front and the SUV was back at the window. The voice came through the speaker saying the food was cold and I should make it again. I walked the kitchen, dropping new fries and pouring new drinks. I brought it all to the window. The guy smiled and said thank you, then asked if I had family waiting at home. I said no. He nodded and said that was good because the family in the crash had been so close. I backed up from the window and locked it. I walked the store 10 times after that, each lap faster because the sounds were following closer. I ended up in the back room with the door locked, listening. The voice came through the speaker again, saying the food was still not right. I walked the kitchen again, made the order again, brought it to the window. The SUV was there. The guy took the bag and said thank you. The pattern kept repeating until the sun started coming up and the SUV finally left. I sat in my car for a long time before driving home, checking the mirrors the whole way. The dread never left. The bell rang again at 3:12, and the voice came through with the same order. But this time it added that the fries should be extra crispy because last time they were soggy. I walked the kitchen fast, dropping new baskets. The oil hissed. I poured the drink, bagged it, walked back to the window. The SUV was there. The guy smiled, took the bag, said thank you, and asked if I'd seen the news about the crash on the highway. I said no. He nodded and said the family never made it to their meal. I backed up and locked the window. I walked the store again from the front to the back to the storage room, checking every door and every camera. The shadow on the footage was closer. When the footsteps started again, I ran to the side door and held the handle. The pressure built. I yelled, and it eased. I walked back to the front. The SUV was gone, but the voice came through the speaker again, saying the food was still not right. I walked the kitchen again, made the order again, brought it to the window. The SUV was there. The guy took the bag and said thank you. The pattern kept going. I kept moving. The dread kept growing. The night stretched out with me running from the counter to the kitchen to the back room to the window, checking cameras and locks, the footsteps following every step. I ended up barricaded in the storage room, listening until 6. The dread never left. The bell rang again at 4:03, and the voice came through with the order, adding that my shift was almost over and I should make it quick because he was hungry. I walked the kitchen fast. The oil hissed. I bagged it and walked to the window. The SUV was there. The guy smiled, took the bag, said thank you, and asked if I had family waiting at home. I said no. He nodded and said that was good because the family in the crash had been so close. I backed up and locked the window. I ran to the back room and checked the cameras. The shadow was closer. I ran to the side door and held the handle. The pressure built. I yelled, and it eased. I walked back to the front. The SUV was gone, but the voice came through the speaker again, saying the food was still not right. I walked the kitchen again and made the order again. I brought it to the window and the SUV was there. The guy took the bag and said thank you. The pattern kept going. I kept moving. The dread kept growing. The night stretched out with me running from the counter to the kitchen to the back room to the window, checking cameras and locks, the footsteps following every step. I ended up barricaded in the storage room listening until 6. The dread never left. The lot is still there. The cameras are still there. The raise was never about the money. It was about having someone there when the quiet got too loud and the voice knew too much. I keep thinking about how many other night workers are out there alone in places like that, and how easy it is for the quiet to turn into something that knows your name and keeps coming back. The phone rings sometimes with no number, and I know it's the store line. I don't answer, but the wait never leaves. I keep walking the rooms in my head, checking every lock, even though I'm home. The dread makes my fingers slow and my thoughts ramble. I know the speaker will keep crackling and the voice will keep knowing things, and I will keep moving and checking and listening until I can't anymore. The bell rang again at 4:57, and the voice came through with the order one last time, adding that the shake should be extra thick because the little one liked it that way. I walked the kitchen one more time. The oil hissed. I bagged it and walked to the window. The SUV was there. The guy smiled, took the bag, said thank you. The night was almost over. I walked the store one last time, checking every door and every camera. The shadow was gone. The lot was empty. I sat in my car for a long time before driving home, checking the mirrors the whole way. The dread never left. The lot is still there. The cameras are still there. The raise was never about the money. It was about having someone there when the quiet got too loud and the voice knew too much. I keep thinking about how many other night workers are out there alone in places like that, and how easy it is for the quiet to turn into something that knows your name and keeps coming back. The phone rings sometimes with no number, and I know it's the store line. I don't answer, but the wait never leaves. I keep walking the rooms in my head, checking every lock, even though I'm home. The dread makes my fingers slow and my thoughts ramble, and I know the speaker will keep crackling and the voice will keep knowing things, and I will keep moving and checking and listening until I can't anymore.